Okay, let us begin. Well, welcome to the story of the miracle, the American Revolution. No matter how many times I do this program, I'm just always just captivated by the fact that it never should have happened. It absolutely never should have happened. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why. Yeah, my name is Brant Ross, and this past July 4th was our 246th birthday. And if you are 82 years old or more, you are one third the age of our country. Think about that. We have witnessed one third the age of our country's history. If you're 62, as young as that, you've witnessed one quarter. Think about that. Think about that in context. Iran, of course, which was originally Persia, was actually founded 3,200 years BC, which means that Iran is over 5,000 years old. Same with Egypt, Vietnam, Armenia, North Korea, India, Georgia, Israel, Sudan, Afghanistan. And look at these countries. And with the perhaps the exception of Israel, every one of these countries is in a state today where you wonder how they could have been so superior. And they were. These countries had absolute amazing technology and art and everything. What happened to them? Well, that's not our subject to discuss. I can give you my theories on that some other time. The miracle of the American Revolution. It definitely was a game changer. And of course, there were so many of them. Person or thing that dramatically changes the course, strategy, character of something. And the stories are strictly my opinion. I do not claim to be a historian. I am a storyteller. And this is probably the most amazing story that I will ever tell. The story of the miracle of the American Revolution tells of some of the game changers and the milestones that shaped our destiny. The victory over a far superior foe was not a well orchestrated grand plan. It was a combination of heroism, tenacity, coincidence, luck, and perhaps some miracles. And if we look at those original 13 colonies, this is a little bit deceptive because the entire population of the country was living really on the seacoast. So that where these countries extended out into the middle west of the country, that's not where the population was. The population was clustered right around the ocean. Don't tread on me. It's called the Gadsden flag. There's a whole story about that. But the whole idea was that our country was like a rattlesnake. Don't step on us because we'll bite back. This is supposedly the first political cartoon in 1751 by who else but Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, who was an early advocate of separating from the mother country. And he created this cartoon. The parts of the snake are the individual colonies. And his message at that time was, we must join together or we will die. Story of those 13 colonies is the story of the formation of the United States. I might add here that there were actually 15 colonies. There were two colonies called West Florida and East Florida, but they were never actually organized to become where they became organized where they could become an official colony. But the stories of those two colonies is pretty interesting on its own. It was the halcyon days of colonial life, 1750 to 1770. It was calm, untroubled, quiet existence. Why? Because 10,000 British troops in the colonies kept the French and Indians from making trouble. But in 1765, the Stamp Act had passed. What was the Stamp Act? It was a tax. It was a tax on almost everything. Sam Adams, John Adams' cousin, was a rabble rouser, and he railed against the act. Mobs frequently appeared on the streets. British troops had been increased to control the mobs. Then in 1770, Boston Massacre. British troops were trying to dispatch a mob. A rifle shot rang out. Don't know who fired this shot, but the British soldiers responded by firing on the mob, and 5 Americans were killed. And then in 1773, the Boston Tea Party. This was really created a sea change in people's attitudes. What they were doing is they dressed, well, I'll tell you a little story. Let me show you a few pictures first. These are all paintings, of course, depicting various artists' interpretation of what the Tea Party was. December 1773, when a band of Bostonians dressed as Indians boarded the British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea. Huge amount of money. An outraged British Parliament, when they learned of this, they passed laws called the Intolerable or Coercive Acts. They were trying to reassert their authority in Massachusetts, and boy, did they ever. The Coercive Acts, number 1, closed the Boston port. Number 2, juries were appointed by the sheriff, not by the people. British soldiers were not subject to colonial courts. British soldiers were to be housed in unoccupied structures. Let me clarify that. There were so many soldiers in Boston, there weren't enough unoccupied structures. So what did the soldiers do? They moved in wherever they wanted. The Coercive Acts also allowed New England colonies 1 town meeting per year. Well, how could they possibly do anything with 1 meeting? And then the Quebec Act. What was the Quebec Act? Few colonials understood the geographic consequences of the Quebec Act. They did understand that Protestant America was being forced to give territory to Catholic Quebec, which Quebec at that time was Canada. What it did, it took the center part of our country, Michigan, Ohio, obviously states not yet named, Indiana, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Essentially what it did, it carved out the middle of our country and gave it to Quebec or Canada. Lord North had struck the first match. The news spread as fast as a horse could be ridden. Other colonies, the southern colonies especially, saw the new laws as British Empire might. They were furious. And then Yankee Doodle. The term Yankee Doodle is kind of interesting because the British soldiers, who were obviously the finest military in the world at that time, when they saw our militia, our colonial militia, they said, these guys aren't smart enough to tell the difference between a feather in their hat or a stick of macaroni. And of course, the colonists and the militia liked it. And they created this song. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Father and I went down to camp along with Captain Good, and there we saw the men and boys as thick as hasty pudding. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Every time the cannon fires, takes a horn of powder, makes a noise like father's gun, holy a nation loud. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Personal comment. What was really happening in the Revolutionary War? The War of Independence was not supported by a majority of the people in the colonies. Historians estimate 40% supported it, 20% opposed it, 40% were neutral. Most people just didn't want because they knew we were not ready for war. We were not only fighting the British, but family was pitted against family. This really was a civil war. Family was pitted against friends. Native Americans were in alliance with the British, and there were brutal battles between Indians and frontiersmen. Why? Because the Indians thought that the British would help them, because the British promised, we'll defend your land. We'll make sure that the colonials don't take your land. We had a country, if you could call it that, with no government structure, no military structure, no army, no navy, no defense other than a loose militia that must confront an overwhelming force. In 1774, the First Continental Congress sends a respectful petition to King George III to inform him, if it had not been for the coercive acts of oppression, the colonies would be standing behind British rule. We didn't want to go to war with our mother country. Despite the anger towards the United Kingdom after the coercive acts, Congress was still willing to assert its loyalty to the king. In return for this loyalty, Congress asked the king to resolve the grievances of the colonies. A group of colonial delegates, George Washington, John and Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, and John Jay, met in Philadelphia in September of 74 to voice their grievances against the crown. The First Continental Congress did not demand independence, but it denounced the heavy hand of Britain. In 1775, Parliament agreed to concede some colonial grievances. However, it was too late. As war began at Concord on April 19th, 1775, when a British attempt to stem a rebellion resulted in the shot heard round the world. On June 17th, in the Revolution's first major battle, colonial forces inflicted heavy casualties on the British regiment of General Howe at Breed's Hill in Boston. The Battle of Bunker Hill ended in British victory, but it bolstered the revolutionary cause. Our fathers bled at Valley Forge. The snow was red with blood, their faith was warm. At Valley Forge, their faith was brotherhood. Wasn't that a time? Wasn't that a time? A time to try the soul of man. Wasn't that a terrible time? Brave men who fought at Bunker Hill now lie in soldiers' graves, and there they fought for freedom's tide, and their faith was saved. Wasn't that a time? Wasn't that a time? A time to try the soul of man. Wasn't a terrible time? Our fathers bled at Valley Ford. The snow was red with blood, their faith was warm. At Valley Ford, faith was brotherhood. Wasn't that a time? Wasn't that a time? A time to try the soul of man. Wasn't that a wonderful time? Wasn't that a wonderful time? The Second Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. Delegates, including Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, vote to form a Continental Army with George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Throughout that fall and winter, Washington's forces struggled to keep the British contained in Boston. Artillery captured at Fort Ticonderoga in New York helped shift the balance of that struggle in late winter. On July 4th, the Continental Congress voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, drafted by a five-man committee, including Franklin and John Adams, but written mainly by Jefferson. The same month, determined to crush the rebellion, the British government sent a large fleet with more than 34,000 troops to New York. 34,000 troops, almost 1,000 ships. The most powerful military in the world. In the Declaration of Independence, it declared King George III of unleashing merciless Indian savages against innocent men, women, and children. But some Indian nations tried to stay out of the conflict, and they allied with the Crown as the best hope of protecting their homelands from the encroachments of American colonists. Remember, there was always a move going west. When people first came here, they were gradually moving west, and obviously there was the conflict with the Native Americans. Indians knew that the revolution was a contest for Indian land as well as liberty. The fact is, the Indian Wars were terrible events, and horrible acts were committed by all the participants. As the campaign progressed, Washington's forces were defeated at the Battle of White Plains and later at Fort Washington. The debacles cost the Americans dearly. Chased from New York, Washington's demoralized army retreated all the way across New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. This is really an unusual song because it captures what was happening at the home of the revolutionary militiaman. There she sits on Butternut Hill. Who could blame her crying her fill? And every tear would turn a mill. Johnny has gone for a soldier. Me, oh my, she loved him so. Broke her heart to see him go. And only time will heal her woe. Johnny has gone for a soldier. She sold her rod, she sold her reel. She sold her only spinning wheel to buy her love a load of steel. Johnny has gone for a soldier. She'll dye her dress, she'll dye it red, and in the streets go begging for bread. The one she loves from her has fled. Johnny has gone for a soldier. Johnny has gone for a soldier. Valley Forge. We cannot conceive of the conditions at Valley Forge. December 23rd, 1778 dawned cold with snow in the air. General George Washington was dictating a testy ultimatum in protest to the Continental Congress. His worries, British troop advancement and the sad state of his forces. His 12,000 troops were setting up camp, some 2,000 or so rude huts with forged wood and the barest of tools. Horses and oxen were in such short supply that the men were pulling makeshift carts. Many had no coats, no shoes, no blankets. There was little meat. There were no cattle to slaughter and fewer than 30 barrels of flour in the commissary. The upshot, nearly 3,000 near naked and starving troops, a quarter of Washington's force, had been declared unfit for duty, and the winter was horrendous. The 6 months spent at Valley Forge would be the most difficult and one of the most important of the American Revolution. Washington found himself in a desperate moment, one that drove him to consider his boldest and riskiest maneuver yet, a Christmas Eve attack. It was a desperate time for Washington and the Revolution. The destitute Continental Army had fled New Jersey and was camped in Pennsylvania, defeated, discouraged, demoralized, and uncertain of tomorrow. The British were confident that the revolution had been crushed. The Continental Army was dwindling daily, sickness, desertion, fatigue. Enlistments of militias were due to expire at the end of the month, and the troops would return home. He'd lose so much of his force. Washington had to do something. His decision was to attack the British. The target was the Hessian-held town of Trenton, just across the Delaware River. During the night of December 25th, Washington led his troops across the ice-swollen Delaware. The weather was horrendous and the river treacherous. Raging winds combined with snow, sleet, and rain to produce almost impossible conditions. Many of Washington's force marched through the snow without shoes. Three other Continental forces attempted to cross the Delaware to assist Washington in his attack. These other crossings failed due to the weather and the impenetrable ice on the river. General Washington, however, was not to be deterred. The next morning, he attacked the Hessian garrison by surprise. After fierce fighting, the Hessians surrendered. Washington's great triumph against the Hessian forces at Trenton on December 26, 1776, is one of the best known episodes of the war. It is so important because at a time when morale was terrible, this is the definition of a leader. He knew that his chance was right then and there. He had to strike, and he did. Fearing a counterattack by British regulars, Washington hustled his tired warriors and frozen Hessian captives back across the Delaware River. He then marched his army to Princeton, where the Americans proved victorious once more on January 3rd, 1777. The victories at Trenton and Princeton not only helped to boost the morale of the army and encourage recruitment, but these actions also impressed the French, who were weighing their involvement in the war. George Washington. Historians rarely agree on our beginnings. One area of agreement is George Washington's leadership role in winning the War of Independence and creating the foundation of our republic. In a leadership role in the 8-year war for our independence, his character, charisma, and skill were instrumental in our victory and ultimate success. Despite having little experience in leading large military forces, Washington's strong leadership presence kept the military together. He had learned many important command principles during the French and Indian War. He saw how vulnerable the British could be in the frontier land in North America. His verve, his physical presence, and command instincts helped to hold together an ill-equipped force that outlasted his more experienced opponents. Washington and his army narrowly escaped total destruction in the New York campaign of 1776. He was faced with the British army to his front and the East River to his back. Washington formulated a risky plan to save his army. He had flatboats brought in so that the army could be moved to nearby Manhattan. Aided by a providential fog, most unusual, a fog came in that hid the evacuation. Washington was able to successfully move all 9,000 of his troops. His smallpox inoculation program was one of the best decisions of the war. In 1775, smallpox had so devastated the American army in Canada that John Adams bemoaned that, quote, smallpox is 10 times more terrible than the British, Canadians, and Indians, unquote. Having survived smallpox in 1751, Washington was altogether familiar with the disease. Not only would smallpox kill off soldiers in the ranks, but the threat of infection also scared away many new recruits. Starting in winter of 1777, Washington took the bold move to have soldiers in his army inoculated against smallpox infection using a technique called variolation. By some reports, death by smallpox in the ranks dropped from 17% of all deaths to a low of 1%. This is essentially what variolation was. A doctor would scratch the arm and create an open wound, and then they would rub smallpox infection in that wound. The person would either die or be inoculated. Fortunately, it worked. And of course, today we do essentially the same thing. Let's discuss some people who were an important part of the American victory. Andrew Thaddeus Bonaventure Kosciuszko was a Polish-Lithuanian military engineer, a statesman and military leader who became a national hero in Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and the United States of America. On learning of the American Revolution, Kosciuszko, sympathetic to the American cause and an advocate of human rights, sailed for America in June 1776. Joining the Continental Army, he built fortifications in New Jersey. He was commissioned a colonel of engineers. He spent 2 years building defense at West Point, New York, transferred to combat duty with the Southern Army, fought in the battles of Camden in 96, commanded cavalry squadrons and an infantry unit, and reoccupied Charleston following the British evacuation of the city. Marquis de Lafayette, French aristocrat who fought in the Continental Army with the American colonists against the British in the American Revolution. Later, as a leading advocate for constitutional monarchy, he became one of the most powerful men in France during the French Revolution. In July 1777, he traveled at his own expense to the colonies. Lafayette was appointed a major general, and he quickly struck up a lasting friendship with George Washington. He served in Washington's staff for 6 weeks, and after fighting with distinction at the Battle of Brandywine, he was given command of his own division. Returning to France in February of 1779, he worked with American emissaries Benjamin Franklin and John Adams to help persuade the French government to send additional troops and supplies to aid the colonists. Lafayette arrived back in America in April 1780 with the news that 6,000 infantry and 6 ships would soon arrive from France. He was given command of an army in Virginia, and in 1781, he conducted operations against forces under the command of Benedict Arnold. We won't go into the story of Benedict Arnold, but that's an interesting story. Combined force, including Lafayette, fought British commander Lord Charles Cornwallis across Virginia, trapping him at Yorktown in late July. A French fleet and several additional American armies joined the siege, and on October 19th, Cornwallis surrendered. The British cause was lost. Lafayette was hailed as the hero of 2 worlds. He became an honorary citizen of several states on a visit to the U.S. in 1784. In 1824, Lafayette accepted an invitation from his older friend, President James Monroe, to visit the United States. Crowds by the thousands greeted him, and he was lauded in cities across the land. The visit included emotional stops at Washington's grave and at Monticello, where the ailing 81-year-old Jefferson lauded and feted his old comrade. Lafayette became the first foreign citizen to address the U.S. Congress. Because of that tour and the patriotic enthusiasm that inspired, dozens of cities across the country were named in his honor. He died in 1834 in accordance with his wishes, was buried with dirt from Bunker Hill. In 2002, Lafayette was granted honorary U.S. citizenship. And that is Lafayette's gravesite with the American flag. James Armiston, a story not known. He was born into slavery to owner William Armistead in 1748 in Virginia. In 1781, James Armistead volunteered to join the U.S. Army in order to fight for the American Revolution. His master granted him permission to join. The Continental Army stationed Armistead to serve under Marquis de Lafayette, the commander of Allied French forces. Lafayette employed Armistead as a spy with the hopes of gathering intelligence and enemy movements. Posing as a runaway slave hired by the British to spy on the Americans, Armistead successfully infiltrated British General Charles Cornwallis' headquarters. Able to travel freely between both British and American camps, Armistead could easily relay information to Lafayette about the British plans. Using the details of Armistead's reports, Lafayette and General Washington were able to prevent the British from sending 10,000 reinforcements to Yorktown. The American and French blockade surprised British forces and crippled their military. As a result of the victory at Yorktown, the British officially surrendered on October 19, 1781. Would that have been possible without Armistead's reports? Despite his critical actions, Armistead returned to William Armistead after the war to continue his life as a slave. He petitioned for freedom, and Lafayette assisted him by writing a recommendation, which was granted in 1787. In gratitude, Armistead adopted Lafayette's surname. After receiving his freedom, he bought 40 acres of land, began farming, later married, raised a family, was granted a $40 annual pension for his services. He lived as a farmer in Virginia until his death on August 9, 1830. That's the letter from Lafayette. What an amazing story. War in the South. Fighting in the Southern colonies raged through the entire war. It was a great area of concern for both sides. In the final years of the war, following the fall of Charleston, the British in May 1780, the South became the principal theater of the war. In addition to regular fighting between the armies, a civil war erupted between the Patriots and Loyalists, with many small battles between militias raging throughout the countryside. Let's take a look at this. We think of the Revolutionary War being fought in Boston and Connecticut and so on. Look how many battles were fought in South Carolina. South Carolina was the principal theater of the Revolutionary War. Why was that? It was so important because of the Charleston Harbor. In 1780 marked major British campaigns to conquer the South. In December 1779, Sir Henry Clinton, with his force of 14,000, departed New York for Charleston, bent on capturing the city. On April 1st, he laid siege to the city and its 5,000 defenders. The American Continental Army was shattered, and the surrender was considered the worst American loss of the Revolutionary War. The British maintained their momentum after the fall of Charleston by pursuing the last remaining Continental troops, and defense of the South fell largely to local militias. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, a military officer who served in the American Revolutionary War. He began his military career shortly before his 25th birthday. In 1757, Francis and his brother Joe were recruited to serve in the French and Indian War. While fighting against the Cherokee, he saw them use landscape as a kind of weapon. After hiding in the woods, they launched crushing ambushes. Marion began to use those same tactics against the British. A British expedition moved into South Carolina in early spring of 1780 and laid siege to Charleston. The British army that had captured Charleston left an occupying force. After the loss in Charleston, defeats at Monk's Corner, and the Waxhaw Massacre, Marion organized a small unit of less than 70 men. It was the only force opposing the British army in the state. Marion used irregular methods of warfare and is considered one of the fathers of modern guerrilla warfare. He is credited with the lineage of the U.S. Army Rangers and the special forces such as the Green Berets. He became known as the Swamp Fox. He was ruthless in his pursuit of Loyalists and Tories. The Loyalists were the American colonists who remained loyal to the British during the war. They were called Loyalists, Tories, Royalists, or Kingsmen. They were considered allies of the British, and Patriots fought them as vigorously as the British, which often meant they were fighting relatives, neighbors, and friends. Look how many battles Marion's brigade engaged all over the state of South Carolina. France. American victory at the Battle of Saratoga brought back hope to the Patriots and enthusiasm in France. The army of Burgoyne surrendered after Saratoga, and France realized the U.S. could be victorious. On February 6, 1778, Benjamin Franklin was in France, signing the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, the Treaty of Alliance. France helped by providing supplies to the Continental Army, such as gunpowder, cannons, clothing, and shoes. The end of the war was a stunning defeat by the U.S. In October 1781, the war virtually came to an end when Cornwallis was surrounded and forced to surrender the British possession at Yorktown, Virginia. The American War of Independence officially ended with the Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3rd, 1783. The British Army accepted defeat and recognized the independence of the United States of America. The Treaty of Paris also set the boundaries of the United States: the Mississippi River in the west, the Great Lakes in the north, and the 31st parallel in the south, and guaranteed American fishing boats access to Newfoundland. And of course, this is a song that our men have sung at every battle. Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome, then hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout. The ladies, they will all turn out. We'll all raise hell when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy. Hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy. Hurrah, hurrah. The village lads and lassies say with roses they will strew the way. We'll all raise hell when Johnny comes marching home. Get ready for the jubilee. Hurrah, hurrah. We'll give the hero 3 times 3. Hurrah, hurrah. The laurel wreath is ready now to place upon his loyal brown wall. Raise hell when Johnny comes marching home. When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. We'll give him a hearty welcome, then hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer and the boys will shout. The ladies, they will all turn. We'll all raise hell when Johnny comes marching home. Washington's greatest display of power was his surrender of power. On December 23rd, 1783, Washington strode into the State House at Annapolis, Maryland, and surrendered his military commission to a grateful Congress. In front of the gathered congressmen, Washington declared, quote, "Having now finished the work assigned me, I retire from the great theater of action, bidding an affectionate farewell to this august body under whose orders I have so long acted. I here offer my commission and take my leave of all the employments of public life." Unquote. There are literally thousands of books about the American Revolution and the founding of our country. These are just a few of my personal favorites. David McCullough's 1776. Bill O'Reilly, this is a recent book, Killing England. So much insight into this book I never knew. Nathaniel Philbrick's Valiant Ambition, story of Washington, unbelievable story of Benedict Arnold. Brian Kilmeade's George Washington's Secret Six, the spy ring that saved the American Revolution. The Swamp Fox by William Dolan James, and The Tragedy of Benedict Arnold. The movie The Patriot, the popular film made in 2000, is loosely based on the exploits of several real-life historical figures. They include a British officer, Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton, and several American patriots, the Swamp Fox, Francis Marion, Daniel Morgan, Elijah Clark, Thomas Sumter, and Andrew Pickens. Fabulous movie. In 1776, the Broadway play and movie. This is the story of the Declaration of Independence. If you have never seen this movie, you should make it your business to see. You will learn more about the Declaration and the people involved. Come and take a walk with me through this green and growing land. Walk through the meadows and the mountains and the sand. Walk through the valleys and the rivers and the plain. Walk through the sun and walk through the rain. Here is a land full of power and glory, beauty that words cannot recall. Oh, her power shall rest on the strength of her freedom. Glory shall rest on us all. From Colorado, Kansas, and the Carolinas too. Virginia, Alaska, from the old to the new. Texas, Ohio, and the California shore. Tell me who could ask for more? Come and take a walk with me through this green and growing land. Walk through the meadows and the mountains and the sand. Walk through the valleys and the rivers and the plains. Walk through the sun and walk through the rain. Here is a land full of power and glory, beauty that words cannot recall. Oh, her power shall rest on the strength of her freedom. Glory shall rest on us all, on us all. And that's the end of the story of the miracle of the American Revolution. I'm going to stop sharing now. See if you have any thoughts or questions.
Thank you, Brant. That was excellent. This is BJ.
Hey, BJ, how are you?
I'm good. The movie 1776. Do you think you could get it like on Amazon or Netflix?
Yes.
Okay.
I have the original version, which came out, I think, in the 1980s. We used to make our kids watch it every 4th of July. I mean, but it just became a part of, our family culture, really, and telling the story. It's an amazing story. You learn things, I'm telling you, that you never knew before about this country. But it's a great story.
And what was the other movie you referenced right before that? With
The Patriot with Mel Gibson.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a little allegorical, but it really tells the story of what was going on. We always thought that the colonies were united. They were not. They were absolutely not united. It was brother against brother, family against family, friends, and so on. It was truly a civil war.
Wow.
Afternoon, Brant. This is Stan Maloney. I appreciate you taking the time to make the presentation.
Well, thank you.
Enjoy. Maybe next time we'll see each other in person.
I hope so.
Always interesting.
I do miss those happy times with those wonderful lunches and sitting at the tables.
Exactly.
I hope we have that again. I really do.
What's your next adventure going to be?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
What is your next adventure or presentation going to be?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. I try to make it something contemporaneous with what's going on, but I'll see. I'll let you know later in the month.
Good luck. Good luck.
Did you do Trail of Tears yet?
That's the story of Andrew Jackson. Yeah, I have done that, and I will probably do that again because that's an amazing story. The story is titled Andrew Jackson, Hero or Villain, or both. And that's got some surprises in it too. We all,
Villain.
That might be in the archives.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that one again. But anyway, thank you all for coming today. Wish you well. Stay safe. Follow all the guidelines if you understand what they are. And good luck on that. And look forward to seeing you soon in person, really. So be well.
Thank you, Brant.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye. Y'all have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.